I love a good painted variegated yarn, and this one is gorgeous. It's a wool and cotton blend, making it super light and great for spring or fall pieces, and has 85 meters for every 50 grams, which is considered a worsted weight yarn. Welcome to the fourth video of Learn to Crochet with Borgo de Pazzi. I'm Haley Hodge of Graphic Knits, and today I'm going to talk about beginning your row with a double crochet and different techniques to create the edge that you're looking for. So let's start off with probably the most common beginning of the row that many beginners start with, and that's going to be a chain 3 at the beginning of your row. Now, oftentimes the pattern will tell you what you're going to do with this chain 3. Sometimes the chain 3 is counted as a stitch, and sometimes it is not included in the stitch count. So if you see here on the left hand side, we have this wavy type of beginning to my row. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem. However, many people are searching for ways to have a perfectly straight edge. And so we're going to talk about the pros and cons of different types of starting your stitch for a double crochet. And on this side of the row, I've worked up until here. I've worked with a chain 3, and then I have chosen to not include that chain 3 in my stitch count. So when working the row backwards on top, I don't work into that last chain 3 as a last stitch, and I leave it alone. And that's what creates this wavy edge. Now, as a design element, if you're looking for a wavy edge, this can be really fun and a really pretty way to border a blanket or a scarf, and it's really not a bad look at all. However, if you're looking for something more to have a straighter edge, often people will work into that third loop and count it as part of the stitch count. So on this side, you'll see here I have done the chain 3 at the beginning of the row, and then when working the next row coming back, I've worked into that third chain of that chain 3 and counted that as a stitch. However, we have another issue that maybe you might not like in your overall design, and when working with that, it creates a series of little holes. You can see here that the gap between the chain 3 and the normal stitches is a little bit larger. And that's because the chain 3 is definitely less yarn consumption than a normal stitch, and it creates just a skinnier or smaller type of stitch. Now, to change that, I'm going to show you a technique that I really love, and it's called the standing or starting double crochet. And it's going to eliminate this gap that we have here. It will also create a really, maybe not perfect, but a really straight edge in comparison to the other options that we've talked about. So being the first technique is just chaining 3 and not including that in your stitch count, so not working into that last chain, or including the chain 3 in your stitch count and working into it, but having this tiny gap, which is the difference between the thickness of the stitch comparison to the chain 3. Or now we're going to show you how to create the standing double crochet or the starting double crochet. And you can see that my rows are a little bit straighter. They don't have this wavy edge, and they also don't have this gap. The starting double crochet is just as thick as the rest, and it's almost invisible to see the difference between them. So let's start. This is a really fun and I think a really easy stitch to do, but it does take a little bit of patience. So we're going to start off by pulling your working yarn up a little bit. So a normal tension would be to start your row, and you would be chaining here, and you would want your tension to loosely fit onto your hook. However, in this case, we want to extend our loop at the beginning to be just as tall as a normal double crochet. So if you have any questions on whether or not this is tall enough or too short, I usually will pull it through and then pull it down and see if it's about the same length as the stitch below. Or you can of course measure with your fingers, etc. So it's about this tall. Then we're gonna turn our work, remove our hook. Be careful not to pull that tension because we wanna keep that. And then we're gonna put our loop back in. So you can see that if I kept my hook in here and turned, then it would start to twist this yarn here, and we don't want that to twist. So we want to remove our hook and then replace it, making that loop go straight. Now this next part takes a little bit of coordination because what we're gonna do is we're gonna twist our hook around this length of yarn here for our first stitch, and it's going to be the yarn over that we would normally do in a double crochet. However, it has a little bit of a change to it. You're gonna want to hold on to the very top of this yarn, of this loop here, with a good bit of pressure to really secure it with your thumb. Now, if you're working with your hook with the pencil version, using whatever finger is the most comfortable, often people use their middle finger to do this technique. All right, so you're gonna hold that with your thumb securely at the top so it doesn't slide around. Now, with turning your wrist, we're gonna take that hook and loop it around like so. So doing that again, holding that top secure with your thumb and looping, taking your hook forward towards you and then moving it towards the back of your work. And we've looped around, you can see that I've looped around that yarn around my hook, and it's created what looks like a yarn over. Now the reason we want to keep our thumb really tight is because if we let go, then we lose that loop and we've got a twisted stitch. So we have to start back over. So holding that tension is really important for this technique. So holding the tension, moving our hook around from the front towards the back to create a yarn over. Now, this might have a little bit of an awkward tension. It's a little bit tight, but don't worry, it's gonna work itself out. We're gonna take our hook and go through that very first stitch right underneath our loop. We're gonna work through that, yarn over, and pull up a loop from your working yarn. All of this time, we wanna keep holding your thumb onto that end of the loop because it can still untwist. But finishing the stitch will secure that twist so you won't have to worry. So now we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops, just like a normal double crochet. Now you can let go of that tension because now creating that loop has secured the twist inside this beginning stitch. And then we're going to yarn over and then pull through the last 2. All right. Essentially, this starting double crochet or standing double crochet really looks exactly like any other normal stitch. And you can just continue going about your row. I'll show you how similar they look. You really can't tell the difference in the end. You can see that starting double crochet might have a little bit of a tighter tension, but it essentially looks the same as the rest and has that thickness, so we don't have that awkward gap inside of our work like we had down here on the other technique. When you're coming back across and you're going into that last stitch, you want to make sure, because that stitch is always going to be just a little bit twisted until you work into it coming on the next row. You want to make sure that you're catching both of those top loops. They can sometimes be a little bit tight, but you want to make sure you're working into both of those top loops on top of that stitch. And when you're finished with the row, it's going to look completely invisible. No one's going to know that was a starting double crochet. And that is today's technique for learning how to crochet. And I hope this helped you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And if there's any tutorials that you're interested in learning that we haven't done yet, then please leave that in the comments as well. And I hope you have a great day. Happy crocheting!